Aye.
Emily.
Aye.
Am I missing anybody? Okay.
Did you get Lisa?
Did I get Lisa? I think so.
I'm sorry, aye.
All right, thank you. The ayes have it and the motion carries. Next item of business is conflict of interest forms. So if you could just take a minute and read it, and then for those in person, we can sign it and hand it over to Laura. For those that aren't here, if you could print it and sign it, and you want to just mail it to you, Laura?
Yeah, they can send it to me and copy Jade, please. Hi, Colette, welcome. We are just reviewing the conflict of interest form. When you're able, if you can fill it out and send it to me, that would be great.
Okay, Laura, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Hello.
Hello.
Grapes for you. Lots of grapes.
Yes.
Took me forever.
Yeah, traffic is horrendous.
Yes.
Emily Lawson has arrived.
Ladies and gentlemen, Emily Lawson.
Can you believe the space?
I know, I was like disoriented. I was like, oh, I know where the conference room is, but no, I don't.
I did not either.
So much space. No, like kudos, Dan Englander. Mhm.
It is.
All right, so we wanted to give an update on the on our schools. So in the board materials, we shared the board dashboard. In the dashboard, with the information about enrollment, which we'll talk about in a minute. Attendance and truancy. Attendance is, we're still continuing to work at trying to get students to school every day. That is a little bit different by campus, but that's still an area where it's taking up a lot of time from our campus teams, and they're doing a lot of work all the time to make sure that we can get students to school. So it's still an area of focus, and will continue to be an area of focus. But truancy is improving, but there's still some students who are not coming to school as often as we would want. From a student achievement perspective, we have given our first round of assessments, and what we've seen so far is that scores in reading and math are slightly higher than they were at this time a year ago. That's encouraging. The challenge is that we need students to kind of make progress more rapidly in order to be able to hit some of our goals for the year. And so a big area where our campuses are focused right now is putting in place additional interventions. So they're pulling students who are most in need of additional supports for additional like pull-out sessions in the morning during advisory. So all students still participate in a certain number of advisory lessons every week, but students who are most in need of additional supports are pulled a couple of times a week in order to receive one-on-one, or it's not one, it's like small group intervention during that like 45-minute block. So the hope is that that will allow our students to be able to grow more rapidly to get more caught up before the next round of assessments. So we'll know more about how that's working in January.
Just a quick question, Laura. It looks like Benning Middle's the only one that didn't show any growth. Yeah.
Yeah, so on which, it depends on which measure you're.
Here looked like they were at 51 and they went to 39.
Yeah, so this that is correct. So
Okay.
Benning Middle is I think we were pleasantly surprised in some ways by like some of their results last year because of the amount of struggle the
Right.
campus had. This year the campus is doing better than they were last year, but there's still a number of needs. They still have, in particular, some like student culture concerns that they're still working on, but
And I think I remember when I went over there, I thought there was a significant number of new teachers over there too.
there are a lot of new teachers. We lost a lot of teachers last year, like over the course of the year, and this year there are, I would say it is definitely the campus with the largest number of new teachers. Yeah. New to DC.
Yeah.
Other things, from a staff culture perspective, we administered our first, we do quarterly staff survey. On the staff survey, our scores were up relative to where they were last year at this time, which is good. There's still obviously like progress that to be made, but at least higher than it was last year. And the principals last week and this week are hosting a bunch of listening sessions to be able to hear more from teachers about like what's on their mind, and they're thinking about what do they need to do in response to like additional concerns. So, but I would say I think schools, it still doesn't feel easy, but I think they do feel better than they felt a year ago. And I think there's a number of reasons for that, but I think coverage has not been the same concern that it was a year ago, and that's making a big difference because teachers don't feel like all of their like planning time is getting pulled from, you know, covering for others. Those are like the big headlines around, oh, and then from like a student culture and staff and family perspective as well. Family results tend to always be high. They are strong now this time as well. They're not in the packet. Well, I'm happy to follow up and share more information on that. And then students, we saw some improvements in student culture. I think we believe that we have a stronger platform for learning. And so some of the questions around like, you know, do I feel safe at school? Do I feel happy at school? I think it's easier for students to say yes to those questions when the classrooms feel more stable. And so that's a good thing. And I think it reflects the level of planning and preparation that our campus teams did over the summer and into the fall to make sure that we were just, you know, a lot more clear about what our expectations are within our classrooms. So that is a good thing.
What do we define as at risk, or how's at risk defined?
At risk is defined by the DC government, and it has to do with students who are who receive governmental benefit, are homeless, or they're like at the high school level, it's like undercredited.
2 years over the
Yeah,
grade level.
Okay.
under
Maybe
over
foster
age
care,
under.
overage, undercredited.
Yes.
Foster care.
Mhm.
All right.
High numbers.
Yeah.
As you look back at the low scores because of the pandemic, 3 years from now, do you think we'll be, or when do you think we would be at the 2019 or recovered from that,
Yeah.
or if at all?
The plan is at the end of next year, we anticipate that we should be back at pre-pandemic levels. Obviously, that's not kind of where we want to end up. You know, we still need to grow further than that, but yeah, we believe that it, like over the course of this year and next year, we should be back to pre-pandemic levels.
I would say from a morale standpoint, Terry, like my kids came home and they were excited because I guess the teachers and the principals were kind of celebrating that they had done better than what they did last year. So they're like, we did better this year, you know, as a school and everything. So I think that probably is a motivational factor for the teachers and for the principals because it was reflected, you know, just picking the kids up. And when the kids came home, they were talking about it and stuff. So. And I know sometimes you just need that little win to kind of keep you going and keep the motivation up and stuff. So.
When you look at the truancy numbers, what would this have been pre-COVID? Like, it's always a problem, but is this back to normal, or this is still materially worse than you would have had pre-COVID?
Dan, do you have a perspective on that? I think that they're a little bit worse. I mean, I think our attendance is worse. The truancy numbers are also worse, but I think that the overall attendance is the place where I see like the bigger change from pre-COVID. But Dan, I'm curious if you have an additional perspective on that.
I don't have the numbers in front of me from pre-COVID, but I could pull them up. But my hunch would be similar to what you're saying, Laura, that they're not in a different ballpark, but maybe slightly worse than we would have seen at this time pre-COVID.
Is there a hypothesis on why?
Around attendance or around?
Yeah, just why it's, I mean, I guess maybe it's just endemic that it's always an issue. But
Yeah. So I think that's like one of the big questions that like our campuses are always struggling with is like, what do we need to do in order to get students to be able to like, come to school every day? I think there are some students where the concern is around like transportation issues and, you know, like the disruptions that have been caused by kind of like being located in new places within the city. Other concerns, and Barry, I don't know if you have a perspective on like the extent to which requirements around vaccination and like there's just been a lot of messaging around the requirements that are necessary to be able to have your child at school every day, and that has been different. And Emily, maybe you would disagree, but I would say there's been a bigger citywide focus around vaccination than has typically been, and that is that's also been different.
I would also just add that we spent 2 years trying to convince all of our families that if their kid was sick, keep them home. And so I think some of that messaging worked. And so they're sick and they're staying home.
yeah,
Yeah, I feel like the preschool, pre-K numbers were always high for us. Kind of again for illness related reasons, but I feel my instinct would have been that the K and above numbers are high for this time of year. You know what I mean? Because if you're already considered truant, then there's been a fair amount of absence already.
Yeah.
But anyway, that'd be interesting to see what Dan says when he looks back. May definitely be misremembering, and everything you guys said would indicate that it would make sense that we would have more of an issue now than we used to have.
Lauren, I think our goal was 95. Am I incorrect?
It's normally this year it's not, because we're trying to acknowledge that it's going to take more time to
Right.
be able to like kind of grow back to where it needs to be. And so the focus is like 92%
Okay.
across our campuses. Are there other questions?
Laura, I would just one comment, and that would be that just from that there has been a earlier onset of flu and some other things. So, and other respiratory type illnesses. So that might be a point. And then the other thing is that I just think it's a carryover from COVID. We see it in the workforce. It's just people are more accepting of staying home. And so I just think I think it's something that you're going to mature out of, but I feel like we have to keep an eye on it. But at the same time, I don't think I think it's something that we're seeing other places as well. I'd be interested to see what the other schools are seeing from an academic standpoint, but in the workforce, it's definitely also an issue. People are just not, they're less motivated to come into the facility.
Yeah.
And therefore it's easier to stay back. And, and for kids, I'm sure they probably have a little bit more support from the parents as well as they're just used to staying, back. So maybe one of the things that I'd like to just put out there is maybe as we're looking at other things that we might be able to have some sort of incentive for coming, just a thought.
Yeah. I think you're right to say, that this is not unique to children, because the place where where I've been even kind of deeper in the data has been around like our staff attendance data. And this year we've had a number of, like, the burn rate around leave has been much faster than typical. And that does not include, like, we have COVID leave. So like if you get COVID and you're up to date on your vaccinations, then you have your COVID covered. We also give COVID leave for staff who have a dependent 16 and under. We give and their child is vaccinated, then we also extend like up to 5 days of COVID leave for them. So even kind of taking that out of the equation, we still have staff members who are using more leave than would be typical. So I think you're right, Pam, to cite just there may just also be just other factors that are taking place kind of more generally across the population that are more around like different dynamics that families are facing, not just kind of about student attendance.
Then my hypothesis would be that there are young new mothers that are probably trying to figure out how to get their kids. Because I was just looking at, it seems like it's at the very young age, you know, the 3 and 4 year olds. Maybe that's some of it.
Yeah.
So that would be probably a target. That's just what I'm thinking. Because it's clearly only in the younger grades, so maybe it's like new young mothers that are trying to figure out how to get their kid to school on time.
Yeah, attendance for our early childhood students is typically like lower than for our older students. Okay, another place where I want to share an update is around our task force work, because that relates to some of our strategic planning work. So I'm going to sure, there's a way for me to make it larger, but I'm not gonna know how to do that. So this is gonna be how I'm gonna be able to present it.
Yeah, you gotta do
Present it.
slideshow.
Try.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
You
There we
nailed
go.
it.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. So this year we are running 2 task forces, and what we're trying to figure out is what is it that's working for our students, because that is why we exist, is to make sure that we are doing right by kids. But we know that we can't only solve for students, we also have to solve for staff, because without a strong and motivated staff, then we're not going to be able to deliver on our commitments to families. We also need to make sure that, from an enrollment standpoint, like that what we are doing is actually what families want, because if we don't do that, then we're not going to have, there's no need for us unless we are delivering on what families are looking for. So in our lead up to thinking about our next strategic plan, we're using task forces from across the network to define 2 things. First, thinking about our program and how we would incorporate project-based assessment. And second, trying to continue our work around staff experience to make sure that we are designing with our staff in mind. We have a long history of using task forces to plan and build buy-in for changes that we're making in our model. Many of these predate me, and so like Emily, I'm sure, has an even deeper sense of the way back days with Assessment Warriors and NGSS Ninjas. But more recently, we've had student support learning experiences like ELA and math task forces in 2019. Those were launched, I think, in the fall that I became CEO. And those 4 task forces put forward recommendations that became the basis of org evolution, right? So that's been kind of what we've been acting on ever since then. During COVID, we had reopening task forces to help us identify what did we need to do to make sure that staff felt confident in our reopening plan. Last spring, we had task forces on math and student culture because those were areas where our staff said we really need to spend time and focus because we're not where we need to be. And we've used those task force recommendations to shape things that we've done this year, both in terms of like resetting culture in classrooms and also providing a lot more in terms of math materials. And then now we're focused on project and staff experience, project-based assessment and staff experience. And those will help us to think about the intersection between what we're doing programmatically, how we're thinking about what staff want and will be able to like implement, and what our families will want and will make us like the choice that they want for their children. So for the staff experience task force, we're trying to really understand how staff preferences around like employee value proposition have shifted from, 5 years ago. And we're trying also to think about, the ways in which we can learn from the experiments that were run. The experiment sounds like such a scary word. So I'm not going to use that word. Strike that from the record. The pilot that we're doing this year with our junior teachers who are working alongside our most experienced teachers as a way of being able to both provide a little bit of flexibility to our most experienced teachers, because that way they're now able to step out of their classroom for a day a week and work on other projects that they're passionate about and that can help support their schools. And it's a way to be able to onboard new staff members so that way they're able to learn what it means to be an effective teacher at DC Prep without all of the same pressures of like leading their own classroom from day one. So we're trying to, kind of learn from that experience, because a lot of the questions that we're wrestling with are around issues of flexibility, right? We're hearing a lot about that from our staff and around workload.
And Laura, you said, and we're giving the junior teachers like some education benefits too.
We were having them, yes. We, as a way to incentivize these like high potential new teachers, they get like a master's degree through Relay. So
When we do task force, is it all internal, or is there any external people weighing in?
it's a good question. It's internal, but we are doing a lot of research from like other people to bring and say like, this is what other people have learned, like wrestle with like these ideas and like program models and think about like what it would look like within our context.
And Laura, do the teachers, the senior teachers, are they enjoying the model that's been employed? Do they feel like they have more flexibility now and they feel like something's taken off of them a little bit?
It's a good question. I think it won't scare you, like different people feel differently about it.
Mhm.
I think some of them like it, some of them maybe have more questions about like, is this exactly the right thing? I also think they haven't completely been able to benefit from all of the like 1 day a week, because what we said was we want classrooms to build a strong foundation. And so their teachers are not stepping out of their class for like the first like 6 weeks, right? So kind of we're now getting into the point when they will be able to utilize more of the flexibility. So I think
That's
that we'll
a good
have a
point.
better sense, sometime after the winter break.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, but we're learning a lot, and we have this year we have a former principal who is kind of overseeing we still have a little bit of like a virtual support program. So he's supporting there. He's also supporting kind of in some other areas, including with this pilot. I think that's really helpful because he's able to bring like a really thoughtful lens, both to try to support this cohort of junior teachers to navigate Relay, which, it's stressful to like work and go to school. And so he's been really helpful in kind of like facilitating the Relay relationship.
Okay.
And I think he's also doing a lot to try to understand from the pilot teachers and the junior teachers, what are they experiencing, what's working and what's not, so that way we can continue to make that program even stronger.
And apologies if you said this, but remind us on the financial model of Relay. I'm always trying to remember that. So what do we pay? Do we pay?
Yeah, we-
Because that's what's always so hard about this mentorship model. It's just, it's super expensive.
Yeah, there's, right now we're paying the relay teacher, our junior teacher, we're
Yeah.
paying them equivalently to like, an assistant teacher, right? So we're paying them less than what we would pay like a starting teacher. But we're also paying for like a master's program. And that's, I want to say it's $8,000, but like, we need to double check. But what it will mean is that like, if they stay with us, they'll have a master's degree. And so they would get kind of a raise above, they're not just kind of moving to like a starting teacher salary, they're moving kind of to like a teacher with a master's degree, right? Which will kind of support them forever. So it was a very attractive program when we like started to like pitch it. And so we were able to get like strong interest. So the way that and Dan should disagree with me if I'm saying anything incorrect, but the way that we've budgeted so far, we would be able to financially sustain, if we said pilot program is amazing, we want to do this on an ongoing basis, we would be able to do that. Or we would be able to say, like, there's an amount of money that has been budgeted to be able to run this program. And if we decided we wanted to like pivot into like something different, some other way of being able to invest in our staff, we could, that money is basically a placeholder so that we could either continue the program or invest in some other way based on what we learned through the staff experience task force, what we learned through the project-based assessment task force, and what we learned through the work that we're doing around understanding family demands. Keep moving. Okay. So we administered a survey to our staff. This is some of what we heard. Top reasons to join DC Prep: our mission. Compensation also spiked. We have, so the work that we did those years ago, it worked. You know, people feel as though we pay well. Culture within our schools, career pathways, Location DC Prep, colleagues always center on, we get a lot of referrals, and that's where we hire a lot of people. Reasons to stay at DC Prep: compensation, colleagues, mission, culture, location. Reasons to leave: workload, dissatisfaction with culture. This is an area where I don't think the question that we asked was like specific to like, what does that mean? Whether that means kind of like adult culture, student culture. So there's still more things that I think we need to like dig into. Dissatisfaction with leadership is another area where we need to understand like, what does this really mean to you? And then kind of other factors that are more around, you know, compensation, personal reasons kind of not related to work, or dissatisfaction with staff relationships.
This sort of goes to my question about if there's external people, because like there's a selection bias, right?
Sure.
The people who are interviewing are people who chose to come here or stay, and may not reflect the people or some subset of staff that we wanted to retain or we'd like to hire, but they're choosing not to for certain reasons. So, I mean, this is super valuable, but I wonder, I assume you do exit interviews with the people who actually do leave, and like seeing how that would sync up with these is probably important too. And then it's probably harder to figure out who are the staff, the star math teachers that you want to hire, but you're not getting and aren't reflected in this. Like, what is it? Why are they choosing KIPP or DCPS and not DC Prep? I think that can be super valuable, because otherwise you're just sort of in your bubble and you're reinforcing. I mean, if you think you have the perfect staff, then it's okay. But if you're missing certain elements, trying to figure out how to keep that element or get that element, often you may need to expand, I guess, the sample set.
Yeah, it's really helpful to hear more about what was on your mind. When you said it initially, I thought what you meant was, how are you including like subject matter experts, like in the,
And that is part of it too. And so there's obviously value, and you get more perspectives if you're hearing the same things from other people in the space, and they'll have that perspective.
Yeah.
But it's also just in terms of if it's a true survey,
Mhm.
it often helps it's not easy.
yeah,
But
Dan, I thought I heard you, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought you said also, like, you thought there may be some value in a couple of outside perspectives on the task force, or?
well, so and that's what Laura sort of did respond to, which
Right.
was that they do get outside perspectives,
Yeah.
if not necessarily like sitting on the task force, but
Mhm.
certainly feeding
Right.
into it. And so I totally agree. That's super valuable, again, to not just be in your own bubble and thinking that we do things perfectly. You're hearing other perspectives from subject matter experts. And then I think it's just specific to a survey, and there's always a selection bias that if you're asking just the parents who are currently DC Prep parents, why do you send your kids to DC Prep? And they say, because of X. And we say, oh, we have to do more of X. But that doesn't explain the 90% of the city's parents who don't send them here. So there's value in both, but you just don't want to forget that if we're really struggling to get superstar math teachers,
Yeah.
that means we're probably not doing surveys of superstar math teachers because they're not here. And I'm just picking that as a random example.
it's a really interesting push, and I'm thinking a lot about like, how do you get in front of those people?
Right. That's
Right,
the challenge.
so if you have ideas on that, I would love to hear, especially because then I can be like, and come and work for us, you know, fill out our survey and come and work for us.
And I just don't know if
But-
there's like citywide, like, I mean, that's hard to do as DC Prep to find those people, but that is potentially leveraging the OSSE or the charter school networks and those kind of, I don't know. So
Yeah.
I can diagnose problems, not solutions. It's easy.
I like the concept, and I'll
Right.
think more about like how to act on it.
I have a question.
Yeah,
Hi. So I'm looking at this more of an from an internal standpoint. Is that correct? As far as the results from this survey specifically? Okay. Were there written responses with these? Like, were anyone able to like write in, an explanation based upon their responses?
I don't think there was like as much, because that I hear you, and I don't I need to go back and look. I don't think that there was like the more open response in this survey. Normally in most of our surveys we do have them. This one, it was much more around like, click on these things. I know that the task force now has a lot of work to try to understand, like, what does this actually mean, right? Because I think you probably have a lot of questions that I have around like, well, what is leading you to feel this way? And so that's part of the work that our principals are trying to do now, because they're now holding like listening sessions within their own campuses to understand, like, here are some themes that are like bubbling up, right? Like, what does that mean to you? Come and talk to me, because, unless we have more context, we can't actually solve some of the challenges. And then this is also data that the staff experience task force is going to be digging into. I think they have their next meeting right after Thanksgiving.
Laura, I've seen a lot of surveys like this, both for other schools, but also in other industries. And, compensation and workload always come up. I think that two things that jumped out at me here were, in the reasons to leave, was a relatively high percentage dissatisfaction with culture and dissatisfaction with leadership. And you mentioned that in your opening remarks. I don't know how you get at that, but I think it's really important to try to get at that, because you want to try to remedy the right specific issues. And I would argue that there's only so much you can do about workload, and you've already done a lot about compensation, and those come up all the time everywhere anyway. But these two on leadership and culture jumped out at me.
Yeah, they were significant to me as well. And I mean, I have mixed feelings about like that compensation is like the top reason to stay at DC Prep. Like I want people to feel like they're well paid, but like that's not really why I want them to stay.
Right.
So
Mission is still more important.
I think you said you're gonna tease this out, right? Because culture is big, right? I mean, each campus has its own unique culture. So is it the campus has that culture? Each campus has its own leadership, you know, so I wonder if it's yeah, I think it will be.
Could I ask a question or just make a point here? And if I missed it, I apologize, but I wanted to amplify Tamika's point. And if I tie it to what you just said, Patrick, about culture, if we don't know what they meant by culture, if that wasn't really, if we're not, I mean, if there can be many different definitions of what people are aggregating under that topic area, we may be drawing conclusions in ways that maybe they didn't intend. And so as we begin to tease certain things out, I think Dan's point is valid here too, right? So how are we looking maybe globally in this conversation to make sure that we're asking questions in a broad enough way, whether that's free text or some ability to follow up, so that we don't draw conclusions that were not what was intended, I think, in terms of the way that your respondents meant us to receive their data.
mhm. Yeah, and another thing that I need to go back and like look at the survey itself, but one of the ways in which it was phrased, it was more around like, what are the top reasons that you would leave DC Prep, right? And so I think it leaves open an interpretation question of, you could either say, I will leave DC Prep because I am dissatisfied with culture, right? Or it could be, if something changes and I no longer feel a certain way about like the culture, then I would leave, right? And so like I think there's maybe a little bit of ambiguity around the way the question was phrased, and I think that's also something for us just to like better understand what that means. I'm gonna keep moving unless I'm gonna leave with you with that.
No, just turn the radio. I can't see.
I'm also happy to send this. Okay, so point of all of this is we need to understand what people mean by workload, culture, leadership, and really dig into like what it is that the ways in which the solutions to all of the different needs that we're trying to identify, like how they fit together. And so a big question that our staff experience team is wrestling with is like, what are the different ways in which we might think about roles and the ways in which that could like play out in terms of solving some of the talent challenges that we face, either in terms of like, can you find enough amazing math teachers, right? And like, how do you think about utilizing people differently? How do you think about like workload challenges? Like there's a number of ways in which all of those problems can be opportunities that we may be able to get more creative about. So that is a lot of what the staff experience team is trying to figure out. But I think the point that you are all making in different ways is, until we have a better understanding of like exactly what the problems are, we're not going to be able to solve them. And so that is what the staff experience team is working on now. So this lays out some of like the creative options that we might explore. All of these, you know, these could be amazing ideas. These could be things that we end up discarding. So continuing with our junior teacher program in ways that create like more flexibility and ability to like better work with smaller groups or support with like other types of school-based needs. Expanding our use of high frequency tutoring programs, which might be a different way of being able to create a little bit more space in the day for for our teachers, thinking about utilizing partnerships during non-instructional time. Sometimes our staff talk about the ability to have someone else manage some of their duties, like, supervising recess or lunch, to give them more time to be able to plan or collaborate. Thinking about, whether we can figure out a staffing model that would allow more people to be able to come late, leave early, to give them a little bit more like cushion in their lives. Thinking differently about roles and responsibilities so that there's, you divide up the different facets of roles in new ways to better utilize what people are good at and interested in. And thinking about, whether there's like other career pathway opportunities that would support teachers to continue to stay in the classroom for longer, because and still feel like valued and recognized and stretched, and make more money. So those are some of the types of things that we are thinking about. All of that was only one task force, right? So that's the staff experience task force. There's also a project task force. That team is thinking about how we might want to make changes to our curriculum that would allow us to better meet the needs of students in ways that could be create more conditions for applying SEL skills, increasing student engagement.
What's SEL?
Social emotional learning. And there are lots of, through the org evolution work, what we said was we want to create a different type of experience for students that will better integrate like rigorous academic learning with more of the like executive functioning skills that we believe students will need to be able to succeed in, life after high school and college. And the more that we're engaging students in authentic learning experiences where they're like applying knowledge in different ways, thinking cross-disciplinary, working in student groups, like there's just, those are all ways of prompting curiosity, which is what we want for our students. And project-based learning, project-based assessment is one way of being able to kind of like deliver on that or pursue that vision. And so this task force has been trying to grapple with a bunch of questions about like when and how to move in that direction. So the thing that that team is really trying to grapple with is how to start this process in a way that doesn't just create like new work and new work and new work, because there's a number of questions that we need to grapple with that are taking place like outside of DC Prep that will impact things within DC Prep. So for example, there are some changes in like the social studies standards that are happening like, sort of outside, but that will then impact us. And so depending on what changes we make, if we get too far out ahead and then, like changes in the larger environment happen, then we could end up in a place where then we have to like overhaul again. And that is just going to be exhausting for teachers, right? And so we're trying to get the task force input to say, we could move in this direction in a couple of different ways. To what extent do you think that we should lead with changes in, should we try to overhaul our curriculum and then kind of layer in more of like a project focus? Or should we think more narrowly about like experimenting with piloting project-based assessment, right, in like more narrow ways, because there's like pros and cons to both. So this is incredibly complex. It's being led by our senior director of program, Cassie, who has like matrix like like you see her working through some of these programs and you can kind of imagine like the scene in the Matrix where they're like kind of flipping all the screens, like she's she just has that kind of mind. But the group that is engaging in this is like being so thoughtful about the pros and cons of how do we create something that moves in the right direction for students while also acknowledging the way that this will play out for staff, right? Because both of those are important. So anyway, we're running these two different task forces, but at the end of the day, we need one recommendation, because these two parts need to fit together. We need to both be figuring out how are we optimizing for student experience and learning, and it has to be something that we can actually pull off, and that kind of fits with our teacher, our teaching team, and what they're able, and the amount of change that they're able to kind of undertake at any given time. So there's a few more task force meetings that happen kind of individually within each of the task forces. And then the task forces will start to merge, and that will happen like after the winter break. And kind of by February or March, then we will have like one cohesive recommendation.
Do we know if are there a lot of schools in the network? I don't know if we know that have kind of moved to this, and are there any like success stories with it, or
In terms of project-based learning,
yeah, like
Yeah.
is that like the trend? It's like to the project-based?
so there are a number of schools that are either pursuing project-based learning, expeditionary learning, project-based assessment. There's and Cassie and Mary and others have spent a lot of time trying to learn from like what are the different ways in which people have pursued this and what has worked and what has been challenging. And so yes, we are
Okay.
trying to learn from people who are doing this.
May try to see if I can set up a meeting. I'm just so curious.
To learn more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
great.
recipients.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to share more.
Okay. Thanks.
And I can share some of like the task force materials, but I think they're just really interesting. So,
Can I ask one question, Laura?
yeah,
When we were looking at all this with Org Evolution, maybe 4 years ago, one of the things we ended up prioritizing was changes to the schedule and program that helped it created more time for relationship building, both between students and between students and teachers. And I don't know if I missed that on the staff, and then one of the hypotheses, that's good for kids, and that will also be good for grownups, because they'll feel more connected, and will help them be able to do their job well. Do you see any reflection? And I know that we had COVID, so, it makes it so much more hard to see. But do we have a theory on like, did we go far? Did that going in that direction help a little bit with some culture that was good for both? Or can we not see that at all? Or have we not gone far enough in that direction?
the question, I think, to make sure that I'm answering the right question, what I hear you asking is, we have invested more time into advisory as a way for students to like spend more time with one another and with adults. I think this year students do seem to feel more positively about kind of relationships with their classmates, but I still think there's, I think everybody would agree, right, that there's like more room to go in terms of helping students to feel truly part of a community. But I think we're moving in the right direction. And this is only the second year that we've had like a director of SEL, right? And so like we're putting more of an investment, and both in terms of like materials, thinking, training, time. And so I think we're heading in the right direction, but I still think there's room to go. From an adult standpoint, I think last year was hard because of some of the shifts that we made in our code of conduct, and the complexity of being more principles driven in our response to student behavior. I think our teachers, particularly in the elementary level, have felt invested in moving in that direction. think at the middle school level, it's been harder. But I don't think people think it's the wrong thing. I think it's just that it's difficult to be able to pull it off well when you're also it's particularly when you're also trying to get students caught up on a lot of academic content. Okay, so now we're gonna pivot and kind of talk about the other component to all of this, right? Because we've talked about what are we trying to achieve in terms of student learning? What are we trying to achieve in terms of like staff experience? And we've kind of outlined how we're trying to answer those questions. And then Dan will talk a little bit about like how we're trying to understand the shifts that are taking place in terms of what families are looking for and how we're diagnosing the work that we need to do from an enrollment standpoint. And so if you look at this document, this outlines that Dan came in today.
Which one? Same page. Yes.
All right, Dan, I'm turning it to you.
Thanks, Laura. And I think for those that are on the phone, the document you all were referring to in person is the one titled Student Recruitment Work Plan. Okay. And I will try to keep it as brief as possible because I know we're quite a bit behind schedule. But before I go there, I will say it's great to see everybody. Sorry that I couldn't be there in person. Looking forward to hopefully seeing many of you in person next time. Last time we met, which was virtual, of course, we shared that we were on track to be about 3% under enrolled this school year. Our enrollment for funding purposes freezes on October 5th, and we were in fact about 3.5% under enrolled. Like we said last time, that's not going to have any direct impact on our programming for this year. We have contingency, we have other financial resources that we can utilize to ensure that we don't have to shift our plans based on that. But obviously, we want to understand what's going on and how to address it for the future. The document that Laura referred to in person and was attached to our email outlines our plan to dig into those root causes, what's behind the lower level of enrollment, and to help us identify what are the steps we should take next. A lot of our initial findings confirm that there's definitely a DC Prep flavor to the phenomenon, but it's not unique to DC Prep. Citywide enrollment did recover quite a bit this year, but it's not been an even recovery. For example, birth rates in DC have dropped every year since 2016, with by far the largest drops in Ward 8. And so it shouldn't surprise you to hear that early childhood enrollment in Ward 8 is the area we've historically struggled the most to enroll. Exactly aligned with those demographic trends. We're also looking at things like citywide educational trends. For example, our Edgewood campuses tend to attract applicants from across the city. In fact, the majority of students who attend EMC live farther than 2 miles away. That's not true, for example, at our Anacostia campuses. And so we're looking into the potential hypothesis that as more high quality options have opened around the city, including our campuses in Ward 8, has that led to a decrease in applications at Edgewood Middle? The plan you have outlines of several different areas, several different questions that we're doing research into. And in parallel to doing that research on the root causes, we're developing a plan of action to address how to ensure that all families across the city know about the great educational work we're doing and so that we're able to restore our enrollment level. We're planning to significantly increase our spending on student recruitment over the next several years, with a vision of incrementally increasing enrollment to being fully enrolled again in the 25-26 school year. All that research you see in front of you is wrapping up by the end of this month so that we can start to implement next steps as soon as December, which is when the lottery opens for families applying for next school year. So we'll be back with updates at the next board meeting on what we've learned as we close out that research phase and start implementing some of our next steps. I'll defer to Laura and Patrick, given schedule, on whether we want to take questions or how much time we have for questions, but I'll pause there.
Any inputs from around? Dan, I would just ask, Tamika, you live over in Ward 7 or Ward 8?
7.
7. I would just ask, as we come up with solutions, as parents, if you could, like to be part of the solution if I can be and stuff. Particularly like if we need to do outreach things and things like that. And then Tamika may have some contacts over on that side of the river too that could probably help and get some input and everything. So
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
okay. I think we can move to the next subject unless anyone.
We're gonna try to do this next topic
Yes.
in like 10 minutes.
Yes.
Because it's a topic worth talking about. So
All right. Good evening, everyone. Excited to be in person with some of you and be in community with all of you. We are talking about some work we've been doing in the background for a couple months now around high quality high school seats. And so I'm just going to jump right into that. Why are we talking about this? We know it's our mission to increase the number of graduates who succeed in competitive high schools and colleges. As we move closer to having 3 middle schools with Anacostia Middle Campus, gradually getting to our 8th grade class, want to be intentional about our options for continuing to support our increasing number of 8th grade graduates. Our driving question, as you see on the screen here, is what is the most impactful and financially sustainable way to ensure a high quality high school seat for every 8th grade graduate? Historically, we've answered that question with our high school placement program and our Prep Next support, which is our alumni support program. In looking at this, we sort of figure out what are the options that we have, and we came up with these 3 options that you see on the screen. 1, continue to send students to other high quality high school LEAs. Merge with another network that has a high school and open our own high school. I'm gonna give you a second just to look at our context and challenges there. And with respect to time, I'm just gonna say spoiler alert, we've chosen number 1, but I'll let you look at the context and challenges for all of those. So I'll give you about 90 seconds, then we'll move forward. All righty. So as we thought about feasibility, right? I said already, so just spoiler alert, we're gonna move forward with number 1. We thought about what it would cost in terms of time and resources to pursue each of these options, and we just quickly realized that it would just make most sense to, if there are no high quality seats available, that we will continue on the path of sending our students to those high quality high schools across the DMV. That's the next slide. Thank you. So how do we figure that out? How do we figure out what is high quality and all that good stuff? We took some time to really think about where are our students going and where have they been in the past. So we went through every high school our students have ever attended in the district and beyond, and we really just tried to figure out, are they mission aligned? And mission aligned meaning, are they strong with academics? Do they provide intentional, tailored student support? And do they have college going outcomes for their students? Based on that, if we were able to say yes to those questions, then we thought about, well, how many students have we sent to those students in the past? And how many more seats could we likely get at those campuses based on what we know, based on historical data, based on my school DC data that we have. We had Jill Salisbury from our Prep Next team and Julie Moeller from our high school placement program working diligently on this to figure out where are our students going? Where could we get them seats? And based on that information, we found that there are indeed enough high quality, accessible high school seats in the district, in our private schools, in the DMV and beyond. In fact, we found over 180 seats. We're not saying that there's only 180 seats. What we're saying is based on the schools we send our students to historically, how many seats we think we can get for our students in those campuses at those schools, that we could secure about a little bit over 180 seats. With our 3 graduating classes, we have about 160 to 170 graduates each year. So that gives us enough seats and then some for our students, our graduates.
Can you just clarify what you mean by like getting the seats? And that isn't it the high school lottery for any of the public charters?
So it's about the work the high school placement does around helping them apply to My School DC, make sure they get their applications in on time so that they are able to access those seats. And so the high school placement team works very hard with them to make sure they are doing the right, completing the steps to get them there.
All schools are not lottery though. All of the public high schools are not lottery.
All right.
So like Banneker, I'm going through this. I have
So
an 8th
Banneker,
grader.
Wilson, and
Banneker, Wilson. Wilson is lottery. McKinley Tech. There are about 3 or 4 more other ones, but the really good one, School Without Walls. All of those you have. Matter of fact, this Friday, Ms. Muller is doing a mock interview for the students so that they can practice on their interviews when they go to these schools and stuff.
Nice. And so based on the data that we have, we feel like we continue to push our program goals, which is making sure we provide high quality academic and social emotional support for our students in our pre-K-8 schools, which is our core work every day. And we continue to invest in our high school placement program that allows us to support our families and to spend time with them on these applications and provide holistic application support. We can get our students into those schools.
Could I ask a question based on what you said about the number of seats
Yeah.
in the schools? Are 100% of our graduates getting into those high quality seat schools, or do we have some graduates who are not getting into those?
That's a great question. I'm gonna look at my team to help me out and support on that, with that answer to that question. Again, like I said, we work very hard with the high school placement team to get them into those schools. There are families who choose not to go to those schools. So I think a lot of times it's not about they're getting in, it's about the choices our families are making, but we want to make sure they have the opportunity to get into those schools and are qualified to get into those schools.
And Michaela, I would say it is certainly not the case that all of our students are going to like Walls and Banneker, right? Like our students are going to a much wider range of schools. And we believe that there are other seats that are still going to provide them a quality high school experience that are not necessarily like, you know, in the schools that we would most want our students to get into. But the question is, like, if we were to, you know, do we believe, I don't want to name any schools, right? But like, you know, but I think that there are like some solid options in the city, right, where we can feel good and proud that our students are attending. And if there are space in those like good and solid options that are going to provide like an education that will get students ready to be able to go on to college, and we have students who are going to some of like the most prestigious schools kind of in like the area, you know, between kind of the selective public schools and the private schools where we always like end up sending students, you know, I think those students, you know, I am, I don't know, opposite of humble as like, you know, enough to think that like we would work really hard to, you know, if we were to open our own high school. And like, we don't run high schools, right? Like that is like an area where we don't have expertise. We would need to build expertise. I can't say that like, you know, in the first X years of operating that we would be able to deliver like, you know, a high school experience that would be better than like sending students to some of like the best high schools that they're getting into right now, right? Both because those are organizations that have been running high quality high schools for a long time and have like kind of established traditions. And we're sending students to a number of schools where they have access to, you know, networks that are impactful for them, I think, kind of, you know, over time. And that's one of the reasons that I think we've always prided ourselves on being able to get students access to a wider range of schools than they might otherwise have access to if they were to go to a different school for their elementary and middle school years.
Yeah.
And so I think for the students who leave DC Prep kind of like best prepared, I think they are accessing like truly tremendous like high schools.
Mhm.
And we want to make sure that the students who are not graduating at the top of their class still also have access to good and solid, strong high schools that will still get them to where we aspire, you know, to what I know their families want for them and what we want for them, to be able to go on to college. But
That's fine. I'm not advocating that we start a high school, believe me. I was just reacting to the analysis about high quality seats and how many there are and versus how many we need. And maybe at a future meeting, it would be interesting to look a little bit more at the outcomes, you know, of the students, like what share are going to what we would define as high quality seats. Is there another bucket level that for whatever reasons, and it could be parental choice, you know, that are not quite in the high quality category, but they're going there, and are their outcomes okay? So I'm just trying to think, you know, how big is the problem and what's the nature of the problem that we're discussing?
And I just want to dovetail on that. The other thing that I was just thinking is, given the demographic shift in the city and the schools at where they've been and where they are currently, and any kind of projections along that line, it's a good analysis to say, well, we're okay now. But if the pool becomes more competitive and we're looking at serving a different cohort of the overall city population, I'm just wondering, are we looking at that in, you know, over the next number of years, that we could still retain that competitiveness? And I am not advocating us opening a high school either. I just want to make sure that we're looking at a pool that's great enough that our kids don't fall behind, because the overall demographic of the city is changing. And so the competition becomes a bit different.
That makes sense.
Yes, great point.
I think the next slide may help answer some of those questions. And so I mentioned earlier that we have existing supports in place with high school placement and Prep Next. And so I just want to just like zone in on the Prep Next support. We know that high school placement alone doesn't guarantee strong outcomes in high school or college. We know that there is support that is needed to get our students there. So Prep Next exists for the sole reason to really support those students to continue on their trajectory from high school to college into career. And so Prep Next continues to achieve its outcomes by spending time with students and building strong relationships over the years. We support our students 10 years after their 8th grade graduation, so that through high school, through college, into career. Support students with college application and financial aid processes, and then connecting them to resources, including mental health support, which we've seen a lot over the last few years with COVID, extracurricular opportunities, particularly at the high school level, financial aid resources in college, and employment resources for our students who go on to college, go into career after college, and even those students who choose career after high school. We support those students as well. And so our Prep Next team are really leveraging our staff, our technology, and our data to really make sure that we are pushing our students and getting them across those lines. So again, after assessment of the available options and focus on the research of option number 1 in particular, which was to continue to send our students to other high quality high school LEAs, we feel strongly that our high school placement and Prep Next resources continue to be the best investment that we need to make for our DC Prep alumni and support them into their high school, college, and career.
I would second that as somebody that's going through that right now, working with Ms. Muller. She's just been amazing. She spends a lot of time, energy with all of the parents. She's just amazing. She's doing an outstanding job with that stuff.
She is a legend.
Yes. All right, thank you. Dan, we will hit it over to you for budget.
Okay, thank you. So we've got two quick topics. We're going to talk about the audit and then a quick bond resolution. On our annual fiscal audit, the board's audit committee met last week with Markham, our accounting firm. And the audit committee recommended that this board accept the audit. Thanks to Dan Fine for chairing that committee. I am going to just highlight a couple of key points from our audit. I'll defer to Patrick and Laura if we have time for questions, and then ask the board to vote to accept it. The most important point is, of course, that the audit was clean, no material adjustments, no findings. The audit demonstrated a strong financial year. If you were to scan those statements in the audit, you would see our change in net assets is perhaps a surprising 14 million increase in net assets. That's a really big increase, but that's mostly on paper. That's driven in the vast majority by two things: the forgiveness of part of our Benning loan as part of the new markets tax credit, and the value of our interest rate swaps on paper that's gone up massively due to the increase in interest rates. So if you put aside those paper gains, our net assets increased about 1.5 million, which is pretty reasonable for a $50 million budget. And our total cash increased about $2 million this year, which will be very helpful in ensuring we can afford our future planned expenses in this high inflation environment, like the phase 2 renovation of Wilkinson that's upcoming. You'll notice there's a large increase in expenses from about 42 million to 53 million from the prior year to this past year. And that's driven in a large part because we returned to full-time in-person school, but we also grew a grade level at Anacostia Middle. We increased our teacher salaries, etc. So given time, I'm going to leave it at that for our summary, but Dan Fine or other members of the audit committee, anything you would add to that?
No, I think you summarized the key points. There's no issues, and the auditors, when Dan and Rachel were not on the call, the auditors were very complimentary of how the team works, not surprisingly. So kudos to you and Rachel.
See any questions there?
All good.
Okay. All right, do we have a motion to approve the audit findings?
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we'll go around. Lisa,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
Michaela,
Aye.
Tamika, Debbie,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Chevy,
Aye.
Colette. Ahmad.
Aye.
Who else we need?
Hadley.
Hadley, did you respond? Aye, okay.
Yes, I did.
All right.
I'll
Is
say aye for
Mercedes,
Patrick.
is Mercedes on? Who's the 202? Is, who's on the phone? Is that you, Mercedes?
What's the number?
202,
That may
and
be-
then the last two digits are 44.
That's Colette.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, well, as have it, motion carries. We have accepted the audit results. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. I have one other quick topic, which is, as those of you who have been on the board for a few years will recall, every time we have a facilities project, we come to the board to ask for a reimbursement resolution pretty far in advance of the project. It's a formality that's required in case we pursue tax exempt financing. And in this case, for phase 2 at Wilkinson, the board has to pass the resolution prior to us incurring any expenses to be able to reimburse those expenses with the bond. So the resolution doesn't authorize us to actually take out any financing at this point. We would come back to the Finance and Real Estate Committee and then the board in advance of doing that in mid-2024. This is just to authorize any expenses should we in the future pursue the bond financing. The Finance and Real Estate Committee already voted to recommend the board adopt this resolution, but I'll open it for any questions before a vote on the resolution.
Seeing no hands or questions, do we have a motion to pass the resolutions?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor here? Aye. All right, Chevy. We've got a verbal from Michaela, Pam,
Yes.
Tamika,
Aye.
Hadley.
Aye, and Colette just texted, she's trying desperately to speak, so she would like me to say aye for her. The last one and for this one.
Okay, thank you. Lisa,
Aye.
Ahmad.
Aye.
All right, I think that's it. All right, the motion is carried. So this is approved, Dan, so you're good to go.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. All right, it's time for us to go into closed session. So can I get a motion to move to closed session?
Motion.
All right, second. All in favor? All right. Lisa, Pam, Michaela, I see hands. Tamika, hands.
Aye.
Hadley, Ahmad,
Aye for Ahmad.
Aye for Colette.
and for Colette too, right? Chevy.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. We are in closed session. Thanks everybody for coming and supporting. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your work because I know it's a lot putting this together and for the refreshment. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
So take care, kids.